Hi, I'm Courtney Gould, and this is my weekly reflection from week 5. So the first article I read was Factors Affecting Second Language Acquisition, and it was very interesting to read about the critical period hypothesis, also known as CPH, which is biologically determined period of life when language can be acquired more easily and beyond which time language is increasingly difficult to acquire. So basically it's talking about how when children are younger, it's a lot easier for them to acquire a language and even a second language because their brain hasn't hit puberty yet, where it talks about the brain starts to uh, divide tasks to each side, so hemisphere lateralization. So, they are more able to have a understanding of it because their brain is placid. Sorry. Um, and, this went on also to talk about, how aptitude has an effect, intelligence. It also talks about motivation, culture, and how that plays a role, social distance. It also talks about anxiety, empathy, personality types, compound and coordinate bilinguals, and the first language, locus of control, and field dependence and independence. And it talks about how each of these things, play a role in getting to learn a new language. Um, I thought one of the things that really stuck out to me that it talked about was the uh, the field dependence and field independence, and basically it talked about how a person is either one or two of these, and they are bipolar traits. And so someone that is field dependency is someone who pays attention to the context. They are very socially oriented, and they need very explicit instructions when being told what to do. And they are less able to synthesize and analyze, materials, and they process information globally. Whereas a person who has field independence is a person who is highly analytical, ignoring potentially confusing info and context. They're able to break the field into different components and parts, and they make choices independently of their perpetual field. So they're really able to break it down and understand it better, whereas, the person who is field dependence is going to have a harder time, grasping and understanding. They're more of a straight edge person. Next, I really looked into the Tabor Chapter 4, Speaking a Second Language. And so in the chapter before this, we talked about steps 1 and 2 of the developmental sequence of a cumulative process, which was home language and nonverbal period. And in this chapter, we talked about telegraphic and formulaic use and productive use. So telegraphic speech is the use of a few content words, such as an entire utterance. So this is really typical in students when learning a first and a second language. At first, they just use a couple words, and they revolve around the identification of things and naming objects. So an example of this is, say the child built a bridge, and you walked up to the students and asked them what that was, and they did not know. You would tell them a bridge, and the student now knows that that's a bridge, and they can associate that with a bridge. And you can also use this to extend past just basic words. And so if a student was you were to ask a student, what is that? And they said a car, you could, add to it by saying it's a racing car. And this is going to help build their vocabulary. So the next was formulatic speech. And this is a study where young children using unanalyzed chunks of formulatic phrases in situations in which others have been observed to use them. So this is really useful when students are in play situations, or they get ideas on their own, and they have to be able to use a minimum language. So it gives an example in the book about how two students were playing, and they didn't really communicate by talking to each other, but there were okays and yeses and nos, and they were able to understand each other based off of that. The next was productive language. So this is when students can build their own sentences, not just continuing to repeat formulatic phrases or names for people and things. So in this process, it's actually kind of surprising because they don't really make mistakes during this, which is great. So students are able to combine all-purpose phrases with nouns, pronouns, and adjectives to create constructed phrases. This is also known as the frames and slots approach. So like a student here would be able to, say, "You're not my mom," or "Look, it's a dog," that kind of thing. And children will use these long phrases and they will start to understand the structure of English. It also shows the student improvement from just using basic words to being able to put them into combined sentences. And it's very common, you read later in the chapter, it's common for students to take steps forward and also steps back. It's not something to be concerned with. They all move forward and backwards. And it's important also to understand that the children, when moving through the development sequence, is that they don't just move from step 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. They're constantly learning steps from higher steps, but they are falling back to the other steps because they're gaps. So it's just a continuation, and it's not like they complete step 1 and then complete step 2 and then complete step 4 and etc. It's something that feeds off each other and they reflect back to the other steps. And then the last thing I looked at was the assortment of learning styles. So I thought this was very interesting. The visual, auditory, and kinesthetic model. So basically for auditory, you learn from lecture and conversation. Kinesthetics is by experiments, case studies, and practical applications. And your visual is just by like looking at pictures and maps and graphs and whatnot. And then there was also the style that was talked about by David A. Kolb, which is there's accommodators, which prefer concrete experiences and active experiments. Divergers, which are concrete experience and reflective observation. So they creatively extend their past knowledge from experiences. And then there's convergers, which are abstract concepts and active experimenters. They ponder the ideas first, and then they decide to test them. So before they go in, really look into something, they're going to sit down and think about how this is going to go, what they expect to happen. Next is assimilators. So this is an abstract concept and reflective observation. They're not interested in testing the concepts. They are just interested in the concepts. The next thing was by Robert J. Steinberg, and so his were based off of two things. So cognitive ability was the first one, and under that he talks about analytical. So thinkers who have the ability to evaluate information and compare it to different data. Then there were creative. So these are thinkers the ability to generate new ideas and create connection from their past information. And then there was practical, which was the ability to apply knowledge when needed. And then it went into talk about the second thing, which was personality styles. So monarch. So they prefer tasks, projects, and focusing on just one thing. They don't want to be bombarded with a bunch of things. And then there was the hierarchy, which prefer task projects and situations that allow them to create goals or a set hierarchy of things to complete. So first I'm going to do this, then that, then that. Next was oligarchy, which prefers tasks, projects, and situations that allow completing approaches goals of equal importance. So, you complete things that are equally important together and then work on to the next things. And then there was anarchic, which prefers tasks, projects, and situations with great flexibility, and they try things as they please. So they don't go in any kind of order. They just start with whatever they want to start with first and move on from there. So this was my summary from week 5. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks.